Number 7. Francisco Oropeza. 16 members of an extended family were gathered at the Cleveland, Texas home of Sonia Guzman and her husband Wilson Garcia when a neighbor began shooting a gun near the house one evening in April 2023. It's not an uncommon occurrence in Texas, but the gunfire was extremely close to the home, causing Garcia and his family to feel concerned for their safety. A family member went outside and politely asked the shooter, later identified as 38-year-old Francisco Oropeza, to move further away from the home. Oropeza refused, so Garcia and his family began calling the police. They called repeatedly as the situation became increasingly urgent. Before police arrived, Oropeza entered Garcia's home and began shooting his AK-47 style rifle at the people inside. And at one point, Garcia was told by a 911 dispatcher that police were already at the scene, causing him to ask why the gunman was in his house, killing his family. In fact, Oropeza had enough time to kill 5 members of Garcia's family, including his wife Sonia, before fleeing the scene. Sonia's brother, Ramiro Guzman, said that he hid in a closet and repeatedly called 911. He also instructed a relative who wasn't in the home at the time to do the same. But now the family is left with questions about the confusing and slow police response. Oropeza was captured just a handful of miles away following a days-long manhunt thanks to a tip that was called in to the FBI. He faces 5 counts of murder and is currently being held on $5 million bail. Number 6. Plank Wars clip goes viral. In a clash between neighbors that was captured on camera and went viral in early 2019, 2 men who were living next door to one another sought to resolve a dispute by hurling 2x4 wooden planks at one another. The footage showed the disgruntled neighbors throwing the boards over a fence that separated their properties as a woman attempted to intervene in the fight. But her efforts were futile, and one man could even be seen trying to climb over the fence. After apparently realizing that she wasn't going to break up the dispute, the woman hurled a broom over the partition, but the neighbor sent it hurling right back over into her yard. An onlooker named Terence Stocco captured the video from his grandmother's house in England. The clip was just 1 minute and 10 seconds long, but it took the internet by storm, and within days of appearing online, it had garnered over 7 million views. Commenters had a field day sharing their 2 cents on the matter, with Twitter user TwatterLeads writing, "For any American viewers, don't be alarmed. This is just a tradition in England. Morning plank toss allows neighbors to show love and affection by tossing planks of firewood to one another to keep homes warm in winter." Number 5. Jason Clark. After living on his own for several years, Jason Clark moved back into his childhood home in Dalraida, Alabama in 2009. At the time, he was in his 30s, but his aging mother needed his help with everyday tasks. Neighbors welcomed Jason back into the community with open arms, but he didn't reciprocate their warmth. In fact, he made people feel like prisoners in their own home. Jason's many accusers claimed that he physically attacked them, poisoned their lawns in order to kill their pets, and made death threats. He was also somewhat of a recluse with a large collection of guns and weapons, which is almost never a good combination. It was also obvious that Clark struggled with anger problems that he didn't seem intent on getting any help for. Clark often complained about a woman's dogs barking, yet other neighbors who lived within equal proximity to her home would later testify that they never heard her dogs. Clark sued his neighbor, Sarah Chandler, and won, but it wasn't enough to satisfy his rage, and unfortunately, the harassing behavior only intensified. Clark also allegedly tormented the neighborhood watch captain with inappropriate comments about his wife. He was also sometimes seen lurking in the bushes in a ghillie suit, which was meant to disguise him as foliage, and he positioned extremely bright lights on his property in a way that caused them to shine straight into other residents' windows. Neighbors became increasingly agitated as they repeatedly called the police, and yet nothing was done. One of the final straws came when a woman arrived home to find her windows shot out and bullets in her walls. At that point, community members joined together and bought security cameras in hopes of catching Clark red-handed in one of his multitudes of menacing acts. His behavior eventually got so out of control that law enforcement finally charged him with a handful of extremely serious crimes in 2017, including several counts of aggravated stalking as well as drug trafficking and terrorism-related counts. As part of a plea deal, Clark admitted to 2 counts of aggravated stalking in exchange for getting the terrorism and drug-related charges dropped. His lawyer pleaded with the judge for leniency, but that did little to sway his decision. In the end, Clark was sentenced to 40 years in prison for his crimes, much to the relief of his now former neighbors. His past victims are now free to resume the peaceful lifestyles that had been ripped away from them for so long. Number 4. Victor Reynolds and Calvin Eldridge. Victor Reynolds was in his early 50s when he separated from his wife and moved into his own apartment in Portage, Wisconsin. His new home was directly above the apartment of 49-year-old Calvin Eldridge, who lived with his wife and kids. It's also important to note that Eldridge was out of work due to a disability. The 2 men got along at first, bonding over their shared love of football, but it wasn't long before their lifestyle differences and misunderstandings turned them into bitter enemies. Most people who live in apartment complexes understand that the walls and ceilings are paper thin and that they'll have to deal with some level of noise, but neither Eldridge nor Reynolds were willing to make compromises when it came to the loudness that they accused each other of. Eldridge often accused Reynolds of slamming doors and being disruptive while using tools inside his home. He also claimed that Reynolds played loud music on a regular basis without any care for his neighbors. Reynolds allegedly responded to the complaints by turning the volume up even louder. Meanwhile, he reportedly became frustrated by the way Eldridge's children behaved. Tensions between the men erupted into a physical scuffle one day in May of 2018. During the fight, Eldridge pulled his gun and shot Reynolds in the leg. Reynolds was still coherent when emergency responders arrived, but the bullet struck an artery and his injuries became life-threatening. Sadly, he died, and Eldridge was charged with second-degree reckless homicide and endangering safety. The defendant pleaded guilty to 1 felony count of recklessly endangering safety, along with a misdemeanor charge. The judge imposed a 9-month jail sentence along with 4 years of probation. For Reynolds' loved ones, it wasn't anywhere close to being a sufficiently harsh punishment, considering the circumstances. Reynolds' sister, Christine Dottle, told local station WKOW that Eldridge taunted Reynolds about his gun long before the fatal shooting, and that her brother didn't own a gun, while the prosecutor described Eldridge's behavior with his firearm as childish. But both parties participated in the plea agreement and its outcome, and Eldridge expressed seemingly genuine remorse over Reynolds' death in court. Number 3. Everton Brown. Truck driver Everton Brown was a bachelor who lived with his pet dog at a nice new housing development in the Baltimore suburb of Woodlawn. He got along well with his neighbors, for a while at least, but at some point he became a thorn in the community's side. Over a 20-year period, multiple complaints were filed against him to the Homeowners Association, and people also sought help from the law. Between 2008 and 2021, at least 3 people obtained peace orders against Everton, which essentially meant that he faced heightened legal consequences if he inflicted menacing behavior against the individuals named in the orders. There was little else anyone could do to take action against a neighbor who, under the law, was simply being a menace. But many of the people who crossed paths with Everton knew that he was a mentally unstable, ticking time bomb. So sadly, it wasn't exactly a surprise when he fatally shot 3 of his neighbors in May of 2021. The 56-year-old's spree of violence began when he forced his way into the home of 41-year-old Ismail Quintanilla and his wife, 37-year-old Sarah Alicote. Everton killed the couple while their teenage son was left powerless to stop him, and unfortunately the young boy was left orphaned by the unprovoked gunfire. He then shot a 24-year-old Nepalese immigrant named Sagar Gamir and another victim as they were exiting their home. Unfortunately, Gamir died from his injuries, and before emergency responders could reach Everton's house, he blew it up with explosives, destroying the entire structure and everything inside. Police encountered Everton in a parking lot while responding to 911 calls about the shooting. He refused to surrender peacefully, leaving officers with no choice but to fatally shoot him at the scene. It was a grim outcome, but it did stop the man's out-of-control spree of violence. Number 2. Dean Keller and Jeffrey Viager. Indianapolis firefighter Dean Keller and his wife had lived in their Greenwood, Indiana home for years when their new neighbor, Jeffrey Viager, moved in next door. The two men got along fine for a while, but that all changed one day in 2009. Keller was outside training the family's puppy when Viager accused him of being on his property. Viager also seemed bothered to learn that Keller was a military veteran. 15 police reports were filed over the next 8 years as tensions continued to escalate between the neighbors. And on one occasion, the Kellers accused Viager of luring their dogs over to his yard and threatening to kill them. Another time, Viager claimed that the Kellers' dog had run into his yard and had bitten him. Things eventually came to blows when Viager allegedly pulled a knife on Keller's dog. They wrestled each other to the ground as Keller tried to get the knife out of Viager's hand. Both men were arrested for battery, but the charges were dropped in the end. The verbal confrontations continued and were often peppered with threats of violence from Viager. He allegedly threw firecrackers at the Keller's dogs, spat on Dean, and swung a baseball bat at him. It was also reported that Viager stabbed Dean with a fork. But the list goes on from there. So, concerned for his family's safety, Keller installed a security camera facing Viager's property. The long-standing feud reached a boiling point in 2017 when the two men exchanged words from across the fence that separated their yards. Viager pulled a gun, but before he could shoot, Keller pulled his own firearm out and fired 11 rounds. Jeff was badly injured and was rushed to the hospital in critical condition, but as if he wouldn't give his neighbor the satisfaction, he survived. Police determined that Keller acted in self-defense and arrested Viager. He pled guilty to criminal recklessness and was sentenced to time served. The police were called one more time after that, but it appears as though the neighbors have finally learned to leave each other alone. And that's not surprising, given the fact that one of them almost died the last time they let things get out of control. And now for number 1. But if you want to hear more bizarre and crazy stories, stay tuned after the video for some more content. Number 1. Ronald Delo. Guy and Monique Hansman were childhood sweethearts who eventually married and raised 4 children together in the coastal Florida city of Port St. Lucie. The couple worked hard to give their kids a good life, and by all outward measures, they were successful in doing so. But sometimes, terrible things happen that are beyond our control. And for the Hansmans, tragedy came in the form of their 82-year-old neighbor, Ronald Delo, who moved in next door to the family with his wife in 2012. At first, the two households bonded over their shared love for poodles. Unfortunately, though, their friendship didn't last for very long. When Delo learned his new neighbor's last name, he realized that he knew Guy Hansman's late father, Lonnie Hansman. Both men formerly had ties to the professional horse racing world, but while Lonnie's connections were respectable, Delo's were less so. It proved to be a bone of contention when it came to Delo's relationship with Guy Hansman and his family, and soon enough, it seemed like everything about the Hansmans and their happy lives bothered Delo. He complained about everything he possibly could, including the family's boat being parked outside and other alleged violations. Each and every complaint proved to be unfounded, but Delo continued to harass the Hansmans non-stop. There were also multiple face-to-face confrontations between the families. Then the seemingly endless dispute reached a whole new level when the Delos got a large bull mastiff and the dog attacked Monique. She ended up needing emergency medical care for her wounds and was lucky that none of her injuries proved fatal. Monique didn't threaten a lawsuit against the Delos, but she told them that she never wanted to see their dog again. Her words, which were perfectly reasonable, were only perceived as a threat by the Delos. They also accused Monique of exaggerating her injuries in hopes of receiving a payout. Meanwhile, law enforcement decided on their own to take action against the Delos, who were allowed to keep their dog but had to obey a strict list of conditions. Less than a week later, the dog entered the Hansman's yard unmuzzled and unleashed, prompting Monique to call animal control. Authorities eventually deemed that the dog was dangerous and ordered the Delos to muzzle her every time they took her outside. The feud only escalated from there, and Ron Delo became increasingly volatile. He finally snapped when he received a request from the Hansman's lawyer to pay Monique's medical bills for the injuries she sustained during the dog attack. No longer able to contain his rage, rage, Del Cerro opened fire on Hansmans with two 9mm pistols, firing 22 shots which killed 55-year-old Guy Hansman and his young daughter Harper. And after that, he got into a shootout with the police. But by the time law enforcement was able to get near Del Cerro, he was already dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound, bringing the long-running tit-for-tat between neighbors to a senselessly tragic end. Number 8. Celeste Bonnan. Better known by her stage name Caitlin, Celeste Bonnan rose to fame in 2010 after joining the WWE. She made headlines for less impressive reasons only 2 years later, when she was arrested for letting a speeding ticket go unresolved for too long. Caitlin initially received a ticket in Grand Rapids, Michigan. The police caught her on a warrant for failing to take care of the ticket when she returned to perform at a WWE event. Luckily, her bail was only about $300, a small price to pay for a famous pro wrestler. In a statement to TMZ, Caitlin confirmed that she got the ticket during a past visit to the state and said she was fully cooperating with authorities. The arrest luckily didn't seem to affect her career in any major ways, which isn't surprising considering it's a non-violent crime. Number 7. Paul White. At a whopping 7 feet 2 inches, 2.19 meters tall, and weighing in at 500 pounds, 226.8 kilograms, Paul White, more commonly known as The Big Show, is nearly impossible to miss. In December 1998, when he was still going by the name The Giant, and shortly before he began wrestling for the WWE, then known as WWF, he was arrested in Memphis, Tennessee, for exposing himself to a front desk employee at a hotel. The incident reportedly happened when White was in town for an event hosted by WWE's competitor, World Championship Wrestling. And while the charges were dropped due to a lack of evidence, The Big Show found himself in even more legal trouble 3 months later, in March 1999. This time he was accused of assaulting a wrestling fan, Robert Sawyer, inside a hotel in Uniondale, New York. According to White, Sawyer insulted him at the hotel's front desk. When he ignored the comment, Sawyer allegedly verbally abused, threatened, and shoved the man. White testified that he tried to calm Sawyer down first, but when it didn't work, he punched the fan. Sawyer claimed that he never laid a single hand on White, but witnesses reported seeing him lunge at The Big Show while challenging the wrestler to a fight. Once again, the case was eventually dropped, with the judge ruling in White's favor after a 3-day trial. As he left the courtroom, White told WP11 News that he was worried he'd be judged unfairly for his size. In his own words, he said, "When you tell somebody that you were startled and you had to defend yourself and you're as big as I am, people look at you as if you have 2 heads. But at 6.5 feet tall, Sawyer wasn't exactly a little guy himself, and thankfully the judge saw the situation for what it really was, describing Sawyer's behavior on the night of the incident as irrational and simply out of control." Number 6. Chris Jericho. Quite a few pro wrestlers have been in trouble with the law for alcohol-related behavior. But one of the most memorable arrests came from WWE superstar Chris Jericho in 2010, who was accused of being extremely intoxicated with fellow wrestler Greg "Hurricane" Helms. Police responded to the scene in Crescent Springs, Kentucky, after getting a call about 2 men fighting inside a cab. According to the case report, Helms was accused of punching Jericho and other passengers in the vehicle. Officers arrested the 2 wrestlers at a gas station at around 5 o'clock in the morning and took the pair to booking, where they forced smiles in their mugshots. According to cops, Jericho and Helms cooperated despite being extremely intoxicated. They were in the area after performing at a WWE event near Cincinnati, Ohio. Fellow wrestlers Christian and CM Punk bailed the men out for $120 apiece, and it's probably safe to assume that they took care of their slip-up and have moved on with their lives. It wasn't Jericho's first brush with the law. In 2009, the year before, a fan accused him of punching her after she and other fans spat at him outside a grocery store in British Columbia. Video footage proved the allegations were false, though, and Jericho was released without charges after police determined it was too difficult to determine who actually provoked the disagreement. Number 5. Jeff Hardy. Jeff Hardy is considered by many to be one of the greatest pro wrestlers ever, and one of the most controversial too. His first major case made headlines in 2009 when he was caught with drugs including steroids, hundreds of Vicodin pills and other painkillers, a small amount of cocaine, and drug paraphernalia. He was charged with possession of anabolic steroids and trafficking in controlled prescription pills as well. The case dragged on for over 2 years before the judge finally sentenced Hardy to 10 days in jail and 30 months of probation, and slapped him with a large $100,000 fine. Hardy served his short stint behind bars and moved on with his life, but he found himself in trouble with the law again in 2019 when he was arrested in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina for public intoxication. Later that year, he was charged with driving while under the influence in Moore County, North Carolina. In 2022, Florida Highway Patrol officers noticed a wrestler's vehicle swerving and running off the road in Volusia County. When they pulled him over, he was apparently confused and belligerent and reeked of booze. According to an arrest report, Hardy wasn't able to complete any field sobriety tests successfully, and his blood alcohol level tested out at 0.291, over 3 times the legal limit for driving in Florida. He was charged with DUI and remains suspended from his current employer, All Elite Wrestling, without pay. In order to get his job back, he'll have to go to rehab and maintain his sobriety. Hardy's legal case seems to be ongoing. Number 4. Nicole Bass. Hailing from Queens, New York, Nicole Bass was a 6'2", 1.9 meters, 230 pound, 104.3 kilogram force to be reckoned with. She started her bodybuilding career back in the 1980s and eventually became a world champion. During the late 90s, she dabbled in pro wrestling. She started her fighting career in Japan during 1998 and went on to join the WWF a year later. But not all the attention Bass received has been positive. In 1998, Howard Stern accused her of not being biologically female. She took a DNA test to prove to the world that she was. 2 years later, in 2000, she was accused of biting a cop in New York City. The officer, James Secreto, was breaking up a fight between Nicole's group and a stranger who had accidentally bumped into a child from her group. It started with a few heated words and eventually escalated into full-out blows. Bass allegedly sank her teeth into Secreto's hand when he tried to stop them, and she spent the night in jail. She made headlines for biting a cop yet again in 2005 after getting drunk and beating her husband, Robert Fuchs. The domestic incident happened after Bass had difficulty filling her OxyContin prescriptions and started self-medicating with up to a gallon of vodka per day. Fuchs dialed 911 and said he was scared, adding that he had already had 3 heart attacks and couldn't handle the violence. He told responding officers that Nicole had hit rock bottom and was threatening to hurt herself, and he blamed alcohol for the outbursts. Unlike the incident in New York, this time Bass bit an officer's hand by accident when she tripped down a staircase. She wasn't charged for the mishap, but she was taken to the hospital on a 72-hour psychiatric hold. Nicole sadly passed away from a heart attack in 2017 at the young age of 52. Number 3. Chris Benoit. Canadian pro wrestler Chris Benoit spent a large portion of his 22-year career as a WWE personality. But it all came crashing down in 2007 when the former world heavyweight champion brutally killed his wife and son before taking his own life. Law enforcement found their bodies inside the family's home in Fayetteville, Georgia, after Benoit's employer grew concerned about his absence and requested a welfare check. Naturally, the murder-suicide sparked widespread allegations that the bodybuilder suffered from roid rage. Wrestling officials initially denied the suspicions, noting that Benoit conducted the deaths over a several-day span, which indicated that his actions were premeditated, not the product of a steroid binge. But roid rage comes in varying forms, according to journalist Michelle Tsai, who wrote in a Slate article that symptoms often include paranoia, mania, mood swings, impatience, and uncontrollable aggression. Tsai also pointed out that steroids cause small bouts of depression and dark thoughts, and roid rage can happen in short outbursts, cyclical bouts, or over lengthy psychotic episodes, making it seem possible that Benoit was actually under the influence of performance-enhancing drugs. Investigators found that in the year leading up to Benoit's death, he and other wrestlers had illegally obtained steroids that weren't in line with the WWE standards. There was also speculation that years of having his head banged around in the ring may have damaged his brain. Tests revealed that he was suffering from advanced dementia and had the brain of an 85-year-old, as well as injuries that are known to cause depression. After the findings regarding Benoit's brain and drug use came to light, WWE removed any mention of the athlete from its website. Number 2. Scott Hall. Scott Hall fought for WWF with the stage name Razor Ramon during the 1990s and made a comeback in the early 2000s. He also wrestled for WCW and a few other organizations. Despite his many successes, Hall's personal life was difficult. His first wife divorced him in 1998 thanks to his drug use. They remarried the next year, then divorced once again in 2001. Hall married his second wife in 2006, only to divorce a year later. By then, his struggles with drugs and alcohol had gone public. The wrestler's addiction was even incorporated into a strange, controversial storyline during his time with WCW. But Hall's problems weren't just a work of fiction, and his demons eventually led to his demise. At the same time his storyline was playing out on TV, Hall was arrested in real life for keying a limousine outside an Orlando nightclub. In 2010, WWE paid for Hall to go to rehab. He checked out later that year and started experiencing serious health problems, including pneumonia, epilepsy, and heart issues. He was on 11 daily medications to treat his ailments. In the meantime, Hall continued struggling with addiction, and at one point he was hospitalized after overdosing. Members of the wrestling community and longtime friends came together in an attempt to help him get his life back on track, hosting fundraisers and even inviting him to live in a sober environment where he would receive all the support he needed. But Hall's health spiraled on a downward trajectory, and in 2022 a friend found him on the floor of his home with a broken hip. He had been stuck there for days after falling and had to undergo hip replacement surgery. During the operation, doctors found several blood clots, and Hall suffered from 3 heart attacks. He was placed on life support, and his loved ones made the decision to take him off the machine after learning that he was brain dead and nothing more could be done for him. He was only 63 years old. Within days of Hall's death, a source with first-hand knowledge of his activities revealed that Hall had slipped back into alcohol abuse during the COVID-19 pandemic. Like many, the lack of social interactions resulting from lockdown had negative effects on his mental health and essentially drove him back to drinking. His health only worsened from there, bringing his decades-long fall from grace to a tragic but not surprising end. Number 1. Jerry Lawler. Jerry the King Lawler held more recognized championship titles than any other professional wrestler. After his fighting career came to an end, he went on to become a commentator for WWE. When fans weren't listening to his comical play-by-play narrative, they were paying attention to his fascinating personal life, which included 3 marriages and brushes with the law. One heavily publicized incident happened in 1999 when Lawler was actually running for mayor in Memphis, Tennessee. He got a parking ticket at the airport and allegedly ripped it up before just driving away, running over the parking enforcement officer's foot as he drove off. Lawler denied running over the man's foot, but pleaded guilty to a reckless endangerment charge and had to pay a measly $25 fine. In 2016, he made headlines for a disturbing domestic dispute with his young fiancée. Lawler, who was 66 years old at the time, and 27-year-old Lauren McBride were arrested for a fight that happened at their East Memphis home. Police took the pair into custody after responding to the home after a 911 hang-up call. According to an arrest affidavit, McBride accused Lawler of holding her against a kitchen counter and hitting her head. She also told police her older lover had gotten a handgun, set it on the counter, and told her to kill herself with it. Lawler told WMC Action News 5 that McBride had come home drunk from a friend's house that evening. He implied that she gets argumentative when she drinks, and that she wanted to leave after a disagreement broke out between the two. But she was in no condition to drive, so he stopped her from going, which only made her more upset. According to Lawler, McBride was the one who got physically violent. WWE suspended him for a short time after the arrest, but he was soon back on the air after the state dropped charges against both Lawler and McBride. Would you rather live next door to a police officer who acts like he's on duty even when he's not, or a career criminal who always has shady company over but leaves you and your family alone and has given you no reason to think that he's going to target you? Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.